I used to hate sidechain compression. No matter what I tried, either volume automation or slapping on kickstart, my tracks always felt off. Either the kick disappeared, the bass got too squashed, or the whole track just lost all of its energy. I used to watch all these tutorials on sidechain, and all of the producers would just completely overcomplicate it. So with that being said, I'm about to break sidechain down in such a simple way that anybody will be able to understand in seconds. And I guarantee by the end of this video, you'll know exactly when, where, and how to use sidechain. So let's get into it. All right, we're back on the whiteboard as always. And before we dive into sidechain compression, we need to do a quick overview on what compression is. So the question is, what is compression? Well, compression is just automatically turning down the loudest parts of the sound to make it more consistent, right? So for example, if we have a sound here, we can say this is some drum loop or something like that. If we were to apply a compressor to this, once that sound crosses a certain threshold, such as this line right here, then the compression will kick in and essentially squash those louder parts down. Now, if you need a more detailed compression guide, I have a full video on my channel. You can go check it out. But anyway, now the question is, what is sidechain compression? Well, let's say we have the exact same sound from before, this one right here. And then under that is another sound. So really this could be anything. It could be a kick drum or something like that. Sidechain compression works the exact same way, except instead of reacting to the sound it's applied to, it reacts to a different sound. So if we were to sidechain this sound to this sound, and whenever this sound crosses that threshold that we set, this one will be squashed down by the compressor, right? So it would look like this. This would get smashed down. This peak wouldn't, because there's nothing right here that's triggering the compressor. But this one would, because this is triggering the compressor for that one. So it's basically just compression, but it reacts to a different sound rather than itself. Now, with all that being said, you might be like, oh, why would we want to use this? This right here is the most common example of sidechain compression. So if we have a kick drum, and then let's say we have a bass track under that kick drum. The kick drum is hitting like this, of course, right? And it has a lot of bass frequencies. And of course, this bass instrument has a lot of bass frequencies as well. And so while that kick is hitting and this bass is just playing, they might be clashing a little bit, right? But sidechain is the way to fix that. So with that being said, if we were to sidechain this bass to the kick here, now what's happening is every time this kick plays, the bass is ducking down in volume, and it looks something like this. That right there is the classic example of sidechain compression, and it's making room for the kick and giving some movement to the bass as well. Another example of this would be if we have a vocal, right? This is the vocal right here. And then we have a little melody playing under it. The thing is, this vocal right here and this melody have very similar frequencies, right? So they're gonna clash. But of course, with sidechain compression, we can fix that. So what we do is sidechain this melody to the vocal. And now every time this vocal plays, we can have this melody maybe turned down by a few decibels. So that's another example. So you know what sidechain is, you know some examples of when to use it, but how do you apply it to your DAW? That's the next question. So I think it's time we go to the DAW and apply it. Let's do it. I got FL Studio loaded up here with the simple kick and bass. Just a very simple pattern for the example. And what we're gonna do is go to the mixer here. As you can see, I've color coded the kick and the bass. It's extremely simple. All we're gonna do here is select the kick, and we're gonna go down to these little arrows here. These are the routing arrows. We're gonna go to the arrow where the bass track is, then right click it and select sidechain to this track. You'll see this little cable going from the kick to the bass. And now that we have the kick going into the bass as a sidechain trigger, all we have to do is apply a compressor to it. So I'll load up the Fruity limiter. We can make sure it's on compressor mode here. And then all we have to do is right click this sidechain box and then select kick. This is our sidechain trigger, right? Then we just adjust it like a normal compressor. So I'll turn down the threshold, turn up the ratio. As you can see, that bass is now ducking under the kick whenever the kick plays. You can even see it on the waveform here. And let's say you want more control over it. What you can do is turn down the release if you want the sidechain to be shorter. So it's a little bit snappier, and you can adjust the ratio and the threshold depending on how intense you want it to be. So if you want it to be less intense, you can turn up that threshold. Or you can just turn down the ratio. So I'll do a little before and after here. Kind of gives it some movement as well. And here's the thing, it's pretty much the exact same thing in Ableton. So let's load that up real quick. So we got Ableton loaded up. Same thing once again, just a very simple kick and bass pattern. So now all we have to do is apply a compressor to the bass. So I'll choose the default Ableton compressor here. I'm going to drag it onto the bass. Now all we're going to do is click this little arrow here and turn on sidechain. And from here, you can select your sidechain trigger. So of course, we'll select the kick. Now we just adjust the ratio and the threshold. Same thing as always. The bass is ducking under the kick whenever it plays. Now we could make a very interesting kick pattern here. And as you can see, still ducking under the kick. Alright, so I loaded up a track I made here. This is for the signature sound video recently. And I want to give you a quick example of how much energy and movement sidechain can add to your tracks. So this is before sidechain. And this is after sidechain. So feel free to replay those parts if you didn't quite hear the difference, but it definitely adds so much more energy and it just feels more clear and professional. Now you might be like, well, what is this weird sidechain track I see at the top here? This is my favorite method of sidechain called the ghost kick method. And I'm about to show you actually because I really think it will take your tracks to the next level. So we're back into this kick and bass project. And here's the thing, you might be like, well, the sidechain, it's cool, but in this particular project, it sounds very long and drawn out. And that's exactly why we need to use this ghost kick method. Now, what is the ghost kick method? The ghost kick method is when you use a silent or muted kick drum, also known as a ghost kick, purely as a trigger for sidechain compression without it actually playing in your track. So it's completely muted. So how do we set this up? Very, very simple. All we need to do is Control T to make a new audio track. Then I'm going to color this, maybe name it sidechain. There we go. Then we can take any sample. So I'm going to just take this kick here. I'll copy it over just for convenience. And we need to zoom in and make this sample very, very short so that it's just a very short click. Now we can paste this over every kick so that it's triggered whenever the kick plays as well. And this is the most important step. Make sure to completely mute it here. That way this weird clicking sound doesn't clash with the track. Anyway, now we're going to go back to the bass. We're going to open that sidechain window. And instead, we'll select the sidechain trigger, that ghost kick. Oh, and by the way, make sure that this is selected on peak here. It just sounds the best if we play it with the kick. And one more thing, I noticed that the kick has a weird clicking sound. So let me replace it. Now, if we play it, we can kind of adjust the release. Now the sidechain is a lot more clean. Since the kick is a lot longer than the ghost kick, it triggers the compressor for longer, and that's why it sounds like the bass just completely cuts out for like a split second and then pops back up. But with that ghost kick sidechain here, it sounds a lot more clean, a lot more sharp. And of course, just for the FL users, we'll do it here as well. Very simple, same concept. We're going to create a new track. We can call this one sidechain. We're going to take any sample, preferably the kick here just because it's convenient. Then we can click this little icon here to make it unique so that this kick doesn't affect all of the other ones. It's just its own thing. Then make this a very short click sound. Perfect. I'll paste this over every kick. Then we can of course add it to its own mixer track. So I'm going to put it on 3 right here. Now we have the ghost kick, the kick, and the bass. Again, same concept as before. We're going to right click the bass track here and select sidechain to this track. Also, to make sure we don't hear the click sample, we're going to unroute it from the master track here by left clicking. See, now it's still playing, but we can't even hear it. Then we just go to the bass compressor, we'll right click the sidechain box and select the ghost kick. Easy. A lot better than before. Here's the interesting thing. If I were to disable this kick here with the ghost kick still on and then play the bass, you can see the bass is still ducking under the ghost kick, even though we can't hear it. It makes some weird pattern. You can do some creative effects with that. Another reason you might want to add sidechain is to add a subtle groove to your percussion loops. So I have this shaker here. As you can tell, all of those shaker hits are kind of the same volume. There's no dynamics. And so with that being said, we're going to apply the sidechain to the shaker. So I'll do the same process once again with the limiter, and now listen. So a little comparison, this is no sidechain, and this is with sidechain. This gives it a nice groove. So got another project loaded up here in FL, and this technique is one of my favorites. So let's say you have a vocal in your track that might be slightly clashing with the melody. I'll play this example real quick.
So I'm breaking out, you made me saying all that you gave me, living on my own terms, taking it onward, finally declaring myself free.
So you can tell that vocal is supposed to take the front lines, but that melody is just slightly clashing with it. It's a little bit too much going on in this space at once. So that's when multiband sidechain compression comes in. Now, multiband sidechain compression applies compression to only a specific frequency range whenever the trigger hits. I have this melody here colored in red, and then I took the vocals and made them blue. We're doing the normal sidechain routing, so I just right clicked here and sidechain to this track. Now we're going to select on the melody and add a very specific plugin called Pro MB. It's by FabFilter, and this is what it looks like. Now what we'll do here is just left click to create a band, and it's kind of like an EQ in a way. We'll click on the expert tab so that we can enable the external sidechain option. And now if we play just the lead and the vocals,
So I'm breaking out, you made me saying all that you gave me.
so you can see that whenever this vocal plays, that's when the band ducks down, and that's what makes this such a good technique. So we can pick the specific frequency of the melody that's clashing with the vocals and then duck that down whenever the vocals play, make it super clean. And of course we can adjust it like a normal compressor. So I'd probably only do this by a few decibels just to not destroy the character of the lead, but I'll make it super drastic just for the example so you can hear it. So I'll do a little before and after here.
So I'm breaking out, you made me saying all that you gave me. So I'm breaking out, you made me saying all that you gave me.
So it really just makes some room for that vocal to breathe. And by the way, if you want a free dynamic EQ plugin, which also works for this purpose, there's TDR Nova, which I definitely recommend. All right, once again, another track. I'll play it real quick. Now we'll specifically take a look at the synth here. As you can tell, there's a ton of reverb on it, and it sounds pretty good. But here's the thing, what if there's a way to get a super clean reverb sound, where the reverb ducks under the lead first, and then pops back up after it's done playing? Well, that's where reverb ducking comes in. So how do we set this up? What we're going to do is, of course, go to the mixer, and I have the synth on purple, and then the reverb track that we'll use in the gray. I'm going to delete the reverb completely from the synth track, and then apply it to the reverb track itself. And the trick here is to make sure it's on 100% mix or 100% wet. You want absolutely no dry signal whatsoever. And so that means with other reverb plugins, you want to completely turn down this dry knob and turn up the wet knob all the way. Now that we have this track set up, what we're going to do is select the synth. We're going to go down to these routing cables once again, and then just left click on the reverb track. This is kind of a mix knob, how intense you want the reverb to be. So anyway, right now it's just going to sound like normal reverb. So now let's compress it. We're going to, of course, add a limiter once again. We're going to select the synth as the sidechain, turn down the threshold, turn up the ratio, and now listen. The reverb shoots back up whenever the lead is done playing. And so, of course, once again, we can adjust the threshold and ratio. And you can also create some really cool effects with this, but it does sound very clean. So if we play with the track real quick. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. And hopefully this cleared up a few things about sidechain. And if you're a more advanced producer who already knew about it, hopefully you learned some more advanced topics. If you want to work one-on-one with me to take your music to the next level, you can check the first link in the description. Or if you need professional tracks produced by me for your project, as well as services like mixing and mastering and stuff like that, then you can check that second link in the description. And by the way, feel free to subscribe. It would help me out a ton. It would help me retire my parents. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.